wanted to be a husband. I want to be a dad, but I didn't know what was going on in my life.
At what point in your career did you decide that, hey, I want to get into leadership?
I was always working on coding and I loved technology. I was such a geek. I literally wrote operating system. I didn't have to tell my team that you need to do this work. They knew it.
That somebody judges you based on perception, that how you look on the outside. Inside your mind, everything is the same.
And that's what is human connection. It's more about there are so many identities within you. Sometimes you find that identity and you connect with people.
Yes.
And I'm a human being. They don't humanize it. They demonize it.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RK Leadership Podcast, where we help empower tomorrow's leaders through sharing of knowledge, experience, and inspiring stories. I'm your host, Rob Cameronpour, and my special guest today is Celia Daniels. She's led 600 to 800 people globally, has won multiple leadership awards. She's recognized for the top 20 biopharma LGBTQ leaders, and she's the founder and the CEO of Rubicon Consulting. Before we start, I want to thank you, Celia, for being here today. I greatly appreciate you giving me your time, and welcome to the RK Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Rob. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for this introduction.
Awesome. So we can jump right in.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So, Celia, can you start off by perhaps telling us your story about how you grew up?
Oh boy. Yeah. It's nice to kind of talk a little bit about our personal journey before we jump into the professional. But thank you, Rob, for asking that. So for the listeners today and the listener today, I want to talk a little bit about my personal life, and I want you to know that there are certain experiences that I've gone through in my life that could be triggering for some of you. I'll give you trigger warnings if you feel triggered for some reason with all these conversations. You can remove yourself for a few seconds and then join. Having said that, I am a South Asian. I grew up in India, in a small town in South India called Chennai. I remember growing up in Chennai when I was 4 years old. I told my mom that I want to be a girl. I had no idea. There was no social media, nothing. I just told my mom I want to be a girl. My mom thought it was cute. She dressed me up, and it's only me and my brother. So they had two sons, and I'm the youngest. And she thought it was very cute for the young son to be presenting like a girl. And it's kind of a common culture in India. If you have boys in the house, they probably dress one of them, and then they take pictures, and then they tell them you cannot be a girl. And that's what happened to me after a while. But I was continuing to dress up as a girl and presenting. And I thought gender was very fluid at the time because I enjoyed being a boy and I enjoyed more being a girl. And we had lots of cousins. There was a time in my life, probably 7 years old, my mom said, you cannot wear your cousin's clothes anymore. And that's when gender actually hit me. Till then, I thought gender was always a fluid construct. And my mom looked at the colonial constructs created by the British government in India, which was very binary. Though India has a culture of 4,000-year-old culture of gender spectrum, which was very fluid, it was completely binarized. I mean, made binary by the British government in some of the countries they've colonized. And that's when all the trans folks who are part of the Indian society went into hiding. And now they are sex workers, performers, and beggars. And that's the way it ended up very bad. And before that, they were always revered in the country. Having given a context on that, I knew I was different. I didn't know whether I'm going to be a part of a trans community. I didn't know anything, but deep in my heart, I knew I was someone else. But outside, I was pretending to be someone else. I used to wake up every morning and think that Like, what do I need to do to show the world, show my friends that I'm a boy? And that's the way my childhood was. Every day I wake up and I think about, if I do this, if I drink what like this, if I drink water this way, if I walk this way, if I play this way, would someone misunderstand that I'm a trans person? And I
Mhm.
was always scared about it. Like, they call in India, they call them as a sissy boys. And with that fear, I lived my life. And probably when I was in my fourth grade, of course, a trigger warning for some of you, I had my uncle sexually abused me, and I didn't know how to react because I was a child. And when something like that happens, when you trust somebody and you really like them, and when this happens to you, it was very alarming for me, and I didn't know how to carry that weight that he placed on my shoulder by this abuse. And I did not want to tell my mom, because in India, Asian culture, you want to keep it within the family. Whatever happens, you're not allowed to talk about it. It's not that I didn't want to talk about it, but I felt like I don't want to insult my uncle in front of my mom, because it was my mom's brother. 2 years later, my cousin molested me. He was another person. And that's when it felt like I was going through shame, and I didn't know why this was happening to me. And I felt very shameful. I felt ashamed of myself. I had a very low self-esteem. My confidence level, everything went low. And as a child, I was going through trauma. Probably even before I hit middle school, I was already experiencing trauma in my life, and the self-worth was very low. And I felt like I wanted to, I hated this dual personality of my life. I hated this girl because this girl is destroying this boy. That's how I pictured myself. And I caused a lot of self-harm, and I was at a point where I didn't know what to do. And while I was dealing with this, also, I grew up in a Christian family, and a lot of the religious ideologies were placed on my head. And I was taught that people like me go to hell. So I
Mhm.
said, okay, I'm going to hell anyway. No matter what I'm going to try, I'm going to hell. So I'm going to do what I want. And in my ninth grade, I went outside for the very first time in India, probably in the early 70s, as Celia. I was caught with a security guard in our community, and there were more than like 15 to 20 people in that community who came out, and they caught hold of me, and they said, "You are such a disgrace to our community, because we don't want to see people like you here in this community. And we're going to tie you up and take you to a dad if you don't tell who your dad is, and we're going to beat you up." And I was scared. They didn't do anything to me, but I was really scared. And I was so worried that they're going to tell my dad. I didn't care about myself at that point. I was like, do whatever you want. You don't want to kill me? Go ahead. But I didn't want my parents, to take the shame and that blame of my suffering. I didn't want that to be transformed into our family
Mhm.
culture. And while I was there, I didn't know what to do, and I spoke in another language and ran away from that place. Long story short, I came back home, and I was sitting in my house, and I felt like I was worthless, and I wanted to take my life. And I want to give some trigger warning for some of you. I was attempting suicide, and I was on the verge of choking, and I was almost dying at the point where my hands were tied behind my back. I put a plastic bag on my head and said, "I'm going to die." And it was really hard for me at that point where I felt like I was dying. I realized that I could die in a few seconds. I struggled so hard. I pulled out my hand, and I was breathing through the bag, and it was hard. I can't even imagine the time that I went through that. It was hard, and I was afraid to die, and I was also afraid to live. That was a plight of a 9-year-old, sorry, a child who was going into the ninth grade. High school was that traumatic. I went into a block in my head where the trauma completely, I was managing this trauma within my head, and I said, "This is not happening to me. I'm not trans, and this is not my life." And I went to a point where I completely was living in denial that this doesn't happen to me. This is something which people just call about and make yourself trans, or something, a lifestyle. I don't know. This is not my life. This is not my lifestyle, or whatever. But the more I tried to avoid, it was always in my head. There was no social media, there was no doctor education, there was nothing that was happening, but I knew there was something going on in my head, and I didn't know what it was. I was attracted to girls, and I was also wanting to be a girl,
Mhm.
which was very weird. And that's how I grew up in my childhood days. I went to college. did my master's in computer science. I worked on some human genome projects in Indian Institute of Science, and I met this beautiful girl. My parents introduced me to this girl and said, "Do you want to marry her?" I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it because that's going to take away all my femininity, all these thoughts, and everything is going to go away because I'm going to be united with this beautiful woman." And lo and behold, we got married, and it was the first 1 year was a honeymoon period. It was really good. And after the honeymoon period, I felt like the gender incongruence, they used to call it gender dysphoria, came back. What is gender dysphoria is basically you are born in one gender, but you are identifying in another gender. Your brain is telling you that you are another person. And that is, you're not able to identify in the gender you're born in. That's called transgender. And it was called gender dysphoria. Now it's called gender incongruence. So the gender that you have in your head and the gender that you're born with do not align. There are probably 1 in 1,000, 1 in 5,000, a lot of folks who go through this. And the numbers are staggering today across the world. It's not that they are coming out, it's just that they've always been there since the existent dawn of the humankind. It's just that people are getting aware of it. They were always stigmatized and they were left in the shadows. The interesting thing is, I came to this country because I was working with Dun & Bradstreet. And it was a reputed firm, and I was brought in to represent my company, and I was really doing well business-wise. But every time I went back home, I felt like I wanted to be a girl because I couldn't be a girl at work. And I was also scared because early 2000, what do you do? And I didn't know how to tell my wife, and I was struggling with it. And we had a child at the time, and now my daughter is actually 24 now. But when she was born, I remember struggling. I was working on an M&A initiative for my company, and that's the time I didn't know I was doing all this M&A discussions with my CFO and all my bosses. And here I came back home, and I was also struggling with my gender incongruence, and I didn't know how to balance it because it was causing a lot of traumas, a lot of stress, both work-wise, both personally. And I was at a point where breaking point, and I told my wife that, "Sweetheart, I want to tell you something. I feel like I am someone else. I feel like I'm a woman inside." And she said, "Oh, I've heard of men who go through this. Maybe you can." It's kind of like a phase, but why don't you go to a therapist? And I went to the therapist, and the therapist told me that you didn't have a therapist at the time in Florida, so someone who's like a counselor. And he said, "I'm a feminine gay." So I want to pause here, basically, because I can go on and on about my life. And at a point in my life where I felt like my personal life was getting affected, and I was professionally successful, personally I was dying. And I didn't know what to do. And I came out to my wife. I wanted to be a husband. I want to be a dad. But I didn't know what was going on with my life. And I didn't want to admit that I was a transgender person. It was really hard. And I remember I was struggling for more than 40 years with this. And I remember a time when my wife had gone to India with my daughter, and I went to this outdoor place in Colorado, and I was just crying because that's the first time I actually said, "I'm a transgender person." And I was so sad because I didn't want to be a transgender person. I didn't want to be identified this way. I was very successful. I was just starting my life, my career in this country. I had a great reputation in my company. My bosses trusted me with millions of dollars and lots of people to report to. And here I was hiding the true, authentic identity of my life, which was so hard. It was really hard. And it's not a lifestyle choice. I can tell you now. It's not a choice that you wake up and say, "I'm going to be a trans person," but you're born this way. It's a medical condition. Unfortunately, it is stigmatized, it's demonized, it's politicized.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I just want to pause here because I know there are lots of questions. I just gave you so much to take in. But at the same time, I want to just wait for some of the the best part of your questions.
Thank you. No, I think that was very powerful, and I greatly appreciate you sharing that story with the audience. I think, again, I was talking to somebody today just before this call, and they said, I was talking about the summit I'm trying to put together, and they said we want to have people that have these powerful stories,
Mm,
right? These are the stories that resonate with people because we don't know how many other people are suffering in silence. And I got a question with respect to that. I won't get into it right now, but I greatly appreciate you wanting to share that part of your life, which is, it's very important, and it's kind of shaped who you are today. And
absolutely.
the fact that, you're very courageous to share that with us, I greatly appreciate it, and, applaud you for that.
Thank you, Rob.
We can now shift a little bit of gears, and I want to get into the leadership aspect.
Mm-hmm.
At what point in your career did you decide that, hey, I want to get into leadership? And, what was the turning point for you, and how did your first leadership role go?
I remember I was doing coding. I was always working on coding and I loved technology. I was such a geek. I literally wrote operating system. I wrote a Unix operating system on VAX VMS systems. I mean, if you're listening to this conversation, you're going to be laughing as to I'm crazy. But that's what I did. I wrote games, Fibonacci sequence on VAX VMS systems. It's a green monitor. That's all you see. I was so good in what I was doing. And my boss called me and said, you I want you to manage an account. You take care of this account where the account management, basically you're taking care of all the P&L for the customer. You're managing that whole the top line, the bottom line, and it was a leadership role. And I told them I'm not cut out for that, but they trusted me. My CEO actually trusted me, and he said, I know that you are a people person, and I have worked with you personally because it was a very small company. And he said, why don't you go and take up this account? They trusted me, they trained me, and they felt like I might be a good leader in spite with all the technology background that I have. And I was chosen to work with a healthcare account at the time, and I did a great job. I was able to connect with the CIO of that company. It's a small boutique firm that was doing a lot of work with HMO type of healthcare services, and I was doing well. I connected with them, but the most important thing that I felt was I told them I'm a boss at work, but outside I'm a friend.
Mm.
And people did not understand that. So they were trying to bring that boss aspect, even when we would go for bowling and we used to go to restaurants. And we are just a community at work and at outside work too, because you are immigrants from another country and you're living together in a community. And for me, that community building was very important. I didn't have to tell my team that you need to do this work. They knew it. They always knew that we are in this together. It wasn't like it's your job, you need to do the job. It was like it's our job. So the approach I always took was it's our responsibility, it's our accountability to the client, to the work that we are doing. And that created a lot of sense of belonging in the workplace.
Mhm.
I felt like the employees were able to express what they were going through. And I also gave them time. I always listened to them when they came up with some issues in promotion, or sometimes companies have these bell curves where some get promoted, some don't get promoted. And so they used to come and sit with me and say, what can I do to make sure my ratings are better next time? And I would call them and say, let's do this. Let's have a conversation around it, and let's talk over lunch or over coffee. I used to sit with them and give them goals, short-term goals, and say, let's catch up after a month and see how you're doing. And when my team size grew to almost like 120 people, I was interacting with my core set of managers.
Mhm.
So who are probably like 7 to 10 managers were reporting to me. And at any time, we had almost like 40 projects running with the clients, 40 SOWs, deliveries, like 40 different deliveries, and across manufacturing, research, across clinical development, commercial space, sales and marketing. And I had to keep my head in every area just to make sure that my clients are happy and my employees are happy. My top line, bottom line, my customer sat, and my employee sat was doing well. The only way I did was to connecting with people, grounding myself, not treating them like a commodity, but making sure that I'm listening to their voice, and especially women. Now, this is going to be sound very odd because I knew deep inside I was a woman. And when I saw women in my workplace struggling to be in a leadership role, because they said, no matter what I do, they used to call me Daniel at the time. I said, no matter what I do, Daniel, they're not going to recognize me because they're not going to listen to my voice. And I said, I'm here to help you, and I want you to be part of this meeting today. And when I invite this my one of my managers, there was only one manager who was a woman, and I invited her to my meetings, and they were all looking at me like, "Are you crazy inviting her? She's doesn't even know coding. She doesn't even know this area." They didn't say that, but I could always sense it in the minds of the managers who were there in that place. And I always, when they saw me respecting her and respecting everyone, not just respecting her and putting her up and putting others down, when I treated everyone equal, we built a sense of belonging where we met outside work. So every week I used to take them out for a happy hour. And I used to connect with them and talk about issues. And we were just talking not about work. I said, let's talk about your family. What's going on? Tell me something interesting. They will talk about the children. They used to talk about that. I felt like I was getting to know them better and they got to know me better. It was such a nice connection. And they still, after 10 years, they are still in touch with me. It's so interesting. I'm like, why would you be in touch with your boss who's left you? It's gone 10 years. But that's how I built not a boss type of thing, but I'm more like a leader, a servant leader, a leader who empathizes with them.
Yes.
I think that changed me as well, because I was at some point I was very arrogant in what I did too. Sometimes I used to be this arrogant brown man, and I was at some point because when the delivery doesn't happen, the clients are yelling. I get so mad and I go and I don't yell directly, but I will show my anger to them in a different way, saying, "Hey guys, we are really messing up. What do we do?" And I always sat and fixed the issues, made sure we did presentations, and I also coached them in different areas where they've never explored before. They were always good in what they did, but I said, "Why don't you do this?" And literally, I have actually called one of the guys who was really good in one particular area, which was in analytics. This guy was really good in analytics. And I said, "Why don't you start an analytics practice for our company?" And he was like, "Are you crazy? Look at me. I'm just good in SaaS and that's all I do." I said, "No, you can actually build this kind of capability across different customers. And I want you to go to this client, work with him." He's now vice president of a company,
Wow.
a big pharmaceutical company. And I'm proud of what I did, not because I was good. It's because I felt like I wanted to create leaders more than becoming a leader.
Yes.
I wanted to create leaders. And that gave me a purpose in my workplace, not just meeting the numbers and expectations. Of course, I did that. But beyond that, my account was, I was expanding. My account was thriving. My customers were happy because my employees were happy. And they always went and said that my boss stands with me. My boss understands me. If there is an issue, they'll always say, "I'm going to call my boss." And I was more like a leader than a boss, I would say.
That's right. Though, and that's a great story. I want to go back to, the way you explain everything. It seems like at some point you had that nurturing effect and that empathy that came in. My question is, do you think that part of it had to do with the feminine energy that you had and you kind of tapped into it, or was it always a part of Daniel?
I would say, based on my personal experience, I would say that I always had a soft corner for women because I was identifying as one. But I've also seen leaders who are always having a very empathetic corner for women. And it's not because they're trans, but maybe I was identifying as one, but also understanding that it was not just women, but marginalized community.
Yes.
When I've seen people who are probably not doing well at work. See, we are if you take the tech industry, basically you have a lot of Asians, mostly brown Asians, and you have some folks who are from India, from Southeast Asia, and also Caucasian. That's the population that we see in the tech industry. And sometimes you work in spaces where diversity is very different. It's defined in a different way. It's not exactly the way we see today, there where it's Black, Latino, Asian communities and indigenous communities. It's completely Asian community. And how do you bring in diversity in the space where you are talking about other issues? So equity was a big issue. Immigration was a big issue.
Yes.
So when for instance, I felt like I was able to empathize with my team. Like for one instance, I will give you one of my teammates came to me and said, my wife has cancer and I don't know what to do. And if they don't have a project, they have to go back to India. And they didn't know what to do because it was such a difficult time. And my company was telling me that if the employees are not going to meet their expectations and we are not going to pay them, and probably will give them a 1 month grace period and they're out. So I had to make a decision, tough decision, as to what do I do? How do I, uh, help my employees in this situation, because it was very critical. So I said, why don't you work in this project? And I'm going to put you in a project which is not very critical, and I have another person backing you up. I want you to take care of your wife. And I kind of worked with my team. I called her 2, 3 managers and said, we got to help this person. They're going through a tough time, and let's do it. So everyone was on board. They were like, we'll do it. Now that person's wife is cancer free,
Nice.
and they have 2 children. And at the time, they didn't have any kids. To me, these little things that you do for your employees, it kind
Yeah.
of not only sets for them, but also sets an example for the people around. And everyone is talking about how great you are. And most of the people in my entire company, they wanted to come and work for me.
Nice.
I want to work for that account. I want to work for the Daniels account because they take care of the people really well. Of course, a lot of them used to, and my bosses were not very happy. And I told my bosses, if you want P&L, I will get you P&L. Don't ask me how I manage it. You want profitability, I can show you. You want innovation, I can show you. But don't tell me how to run my account, my business.
Nice.
And so I think that, not with arrogance, but I always told them with grace. I told them that, let me take care of this. Don't worry about it. I know you're worried about people and other issues, but the nurturing part of it, me, was always there, because I grew up in a very small family back in India. We had a single bedroom for a very long time. Until my high school, we all lived in a single bedroom. And my dad was just a radio mechanic. My mom was a nurse, and that's all we had. They didn't have money to pay for college, and we worked really hard in our own thing. While I was going through all my issues, we also lived in a very lower class family back in India. I think I had all this empathy for people because I've seen that, I've struggled through it,
That's
and I
very cool.
wanted to help people. And it's probably not the trans part of me, maybe it is, but I felt like my parents set a good example for me.
Yeah.
And I learned quite a bit from other leaders as well.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly what leadership is about, is helping people. And that's what makes you, even in my case, it's very fulfilling when you get to help people. And
Yeah.
you talked about, developing and creating other leaders. That's exactly what leadership is about. And the empathy and
Demonstrating,
nurturing piece, it
yeah,
fits in, right?
yeah, and also demonstrating leadership in a very interesting way. One of my bosses, I think we had a meeting we had a team meeting. My boss, what he did was, after the team meeting was done, he went and took the plates and started putting it into a trash bag. And all the team people, everyone in the team, they were all, this is the account executive meeting, and all the executives were all talking to each other. And he was actually the boss of all the people in that room. He's like the boss.
Yeah.
And he walked and picked the plates, put it in the trash can, and I was looking at him and I thought, oh my God, I need to help him. I can't allow him to do it. So I went and I started taking the plates, and I took it. We actually took it down to the trash can, and we were dumping it. Um, and I still remember that. I still remember that, and I was like, my boss actually did this. An Indian boss doesn't. They don't do this kind of thing. They have people to do it. He could have told the team, "Hey guys, can we clear this?" And they would have done it. But he demonstrated that, and to me, that is there even till today. It's so vivid in my mind how bosses are being there, that's a servant leadership. The way they demonstrated that, showing how to do it.
Lead by
That
example.
exam, yeah, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Awesome. Now, I want to get into the second part of the story. You've got the multiple stories there. I want to make sure we capture it because I think this is
Mhm.
also very, very interesting as we've had the previous conversations about. I want to dive into the part. So all along in your corporate life, um, you've been Daniel at work.
Mhm.
I want you to talk to us about when was it when you came out as being trans and how did people take that?
I remember I was probably 3 levels below the CEO in Capgemini when I was managing
Hmm.
one of the accounts, and I was also responsible for R&D in North America. And while I was doing that, I felt, and it was a very, I was interviewed by the person who's reporting to the CEO. And so they handpicked me, and they flew me in, and they did all kinds of interviews, and I was so excited. I joined that company, and I also felt like maybe I can come out of this company because they were very open to LGBTQ community, and they had pride flags flying all over, and I was so excited. And I said, okay, I can come out and still be a leader in this company. Actually, it was not. Um, the reason is when you're an executive in a company and you're trying to come out and represent yourself in another agenda, it's not going to sit well with the leadership because you're worried about the client contacts, you're worried about a lot of relationships and network. And I understand that, but I didn't know how to navigate that change. And I was sitting with the LGBTQ team within that company, and I was telling them that, hey, I am actually a trans person, and I was in a business suit. And when I was talking to them about it, and they didn't know how to respond, they were like, maybe you should come in a sari tomorrow. And I think we are already open to it. I was like, no, I don't want to come in a sari because that's not the appropriate way to come out in a workplace. But here's what I'm going to do. I am going to be open about my identity. And I started being open about my identity, and I kind of sensed that it wasn't. It was kind of frowned upon in a very um, subtle way. If I would have come out as gay, or if I'm a lesbian, it's very different. Bisexual is very different. But when you're coming out as a transgender woman, it is a whole another ball game for these executives to deal with, especially when you're managing like millions of dollars of clients and relationships. And I do understand, and I was in a point where I couldn't continue in that company, though they were good in what they did, but I don't think it was sitting well for trans community. I came out and I was looking for a job. I had so many contacts in the corporate industry. I was so positive. When Accenture actually called me and gave me a job, when I was Daniel, they gave me a job without even an interview because they knew how good I was. And here I was, the same person, but going back to Accenture and saying, hey, you remember the same Daniel you gave job? I am the person now. I'm Celia. Can you give me this job? And I can do it. Hmm, crickets. Nothing happened. And I was like, oh my God, why would he not hire me? I approached all these consulting firms, top life sciences consulting firms, including IBM, all the companies I was applying for a job. And that's when reality hit me as you can come out, but they want to hire you. They don't mind hiring you, but they want to hire you at a very lower position.
Mhm.
And even in UCLA, when I was applying for a job, they actually told me that they'll give me a job as a case manager. And I was literally thinking, I actually built case management business for the build, operate, and transfer model in India for a company for $30 million. I was planning to hire 600 people, and I had probably like 60, 70 case managers. And you're giving me a job of that person because you think I deserve that? Or you don't expect a trans person to be at that level? Or why? What is the discrepancy here? And even in a trans job fair, when I went there, the senior vice president of a big national, a financial firm told me that, hey, I want to hire you, but I don't expect trans people to be as qualified as you. And also maybe people of color, you're a trans person of color could also contribute to the some of the biases that comes with the hiring process.
Yes.
And I struggled with that quite a bit. And the funny thing is, I did this. I was getting so desperate. My savings was going down. And I felt like maybe I shouldn't have transitioned. Maybe I should go back as Daniel. It was one of those difficult times in my life, and I said, I'm going to suck it up and see if I can go back. So I changed my resume. I changed my resume back to Daniel, vanilla resume of a brown person from India. Right. 3 interviews in 1 month. And when you get into the interviews, it's always like, can you please tell us what you do? We know everything about you. Just talk. We'll give you the job. I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it because I couldn't go back. It was so hard for me. And the amount of trauma that I went through as a professional was so hard for me. I couldn't do it. And I couldn't take the job. And that's when my wife told me, and my wife is very supportive. She's an Asian Indian woman like myself. And she told me, sweetheart, why don't you just start your own company instead of begging for these people for job? It was just that statement. Like, don't beg for jobs. Start your own company. And I did. In 2018, I started my own company, consulting firm for life sciences and healthcare. And with my experience in the provider industry, the payer industry, and the life sciences industry, I started this company and I started going back to my clients and I said, I'm Celia. And if they ask, I will tell you. But my resume, my interview spoke volumes. That just got me in the door into these companies. The funny thing, and the sad part is these companies, they want to hire a consultant because the liability is very low. But if you're an employee, the liability of hiring and firing is very high. But I wanted a job. I wanted to make a difference. So I went back to these clients of mine and some new clients, and I started coming out of Celia, and I was working at Celia, and I was doing well. I'm still doing well. The interesting thing I found was, yes, there is a pivotal point in your life where you think about your mental health, your health versus your professional money that you're making. My salary dropped by 30% because now I was not looked at as a woman of color. I was looked at as a trans person, not even a male, female, like trans person, trans individual. That was very demeaning in the workplace. And sometimes I've got discriminated by people who looked like me. Indian women discriminated me because I was competing with them. It's like, why are you taking away your jobs? Or why are you in my project? Have been successful. You should have just lived your life as Daniel. Why did you change? And what are you fooling around with us? I've heard these conversations. It's so just disheartening to see that people who can accept you, probably they don't. And it only built my leadership qualities. It's like I started empathizing with people. I started looking at it and I said, instead of complaining, I said, okay, I hear you. What can I do to make you understand? What can I do to educate this company? How can I turn this negative experience into a positive experience? Not many are made up for that. Not many trans people are called to do that because they cannot take it. But I was called to be resilient. I was called to be consistent, insistent in what I did. And I said, I'm going to do it. I don't know it's going to affect my health, but I'm going to do it because, Celia, when you actually end in your authentic gender, you have no idea. It's like a superpower. It's like you got this superpower, suddenly you're a Wonder Woman and you're doing stuff. And for me, it just changed everything. And I didn't even think about anything. I was just going to companies. I was giving presentations. I was getting strategy discussions with CEOs, and they were all so amazed at the way I was talking because I had so much of knowledge and I was just packaged in this little trans woman's body. And I was able to still bring out the leadership quality, but this time it was so different from just being a brown man average to a powerful trans woman and a leader. And to me, it took a lot of toll on my health, but I said, if I have to live a few more years on this planet, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Create leaders, take away challenges in the workplace so that people like me don't have to go through this struggle. Asian trans people like me, Latinx trans folks, Black people, people with disabilities, veterans. I don't want them to go through what we're going through. So I don't only focus on LGBTQ community. I also focus on disability, people with disabilities, and also
that's
veterans.
Right.
So
that's amazing, and it's great what you're doing, and the more power to you. Based on exactly that, Celia, I want to ask you a question regarding, do you believe organizations today are more receptive to people coming out? They keep talking about this DEI, all these initiatives and, perceptions. Like you said, they put the flags outside and all over the place. They're marketing it. They've got marketing campaigns. truly do you think they actually, they walk the talk?
I've seen almost one third of this, according to Deloitte research. They say that a lot of LGBTQ folks, they quit. Almost 34% of the LGBTQ folks, they quit the job in 2 years when they see the companies are performative. When I like the fact that companies love recruiting LGBTQ folks or people with disabilities, but they don't know how to retain them.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I think is because they don't have the right policies in place. They don't understand it's and it's actually an important metrics. The investors want to know that. The investors want to invest in companies that are truly diverse, and the board wants to do it. So they hire CEOs and they help them run the company. But what happens is a CEO, it's an important people mission is a very important part of the company.
Yes.
You can't treat people like commodity. You have to treat people like people and respect them with value. I see that a lot now disappearing because everyone is about Wall Street projections. Everyone is about meeting targets. They don't care who is there. If I have to run over you, I'm going to run over you. The culture is changing as much as it's progressing in a good way. Seeing the startups, mid-sized companies do well. They are able to adopt. They're able to include. They're able to have a lot more integrity within what they do versus a lot of companies out there. Not to name pick anybody, but there are companies that don't stand. Like, so you've seen Target, you've seen Budweiser, all these companies, Netflix. They don't stand up for the employees. They're very performative. They are not transformative. That's where I think problem is. And the leaders, the CEOs, they say the people problem is with the HR. The HR says people problem is with the chief diversity officer. They hire a black chief diversity officer and they say, oh, my diversity problem is solved.
Yes.
You're good. Look at that. We have one person in the board who is a woman, one person in the chief diversity officer. And we have, and actually nothing has changed because the chief diversity officer is, nobody listens to her, listens to them. And companies do not really advance. And now they're saying, we're going to cut the budget because this person has not done anything. And in the first place, they're not listening to the chief diversity officers. Actually, there's been a lot of attrition with the chief diversity officers. And a lot of friends who are black, my friends, I've seen a lot of them who are in the chief diversity officer positions, they have felt like they have not had enough support of their leadership team because it's your, I'm going to throw it in the other side of the fence, you fix it. The problem I see is the leaders expect a business value. They expect an ROI out of this as much as I'm going to invest in chief diversity officers. I'm going to invest in these initiatives. As much as they do, they always stop at a place where it's compliance related. When it's compliance, they meet the compliance and they're like, I'm good with it because we met the compliance. But what I tell these organizations is go beyond compliance. You need to have compassion beyond compliance. Even with healthcare companies, I've always told them that don't get stuck in compliance, but do beyond compliance. What can you do to be proactive for your employees who are unrecognized communities, like anybody in your workplace, and also treat them equally. The inclusion should not cause exclusion. I do a lot of talk on this because I feel sometimes white folks are being excluded in some of these conversations. When I know of a person who lost his wife and he has 2 kids, he has to raise them, he has to come to work, and he's a white man. When they come to work and everyone is saying white men are bad, and he's like, what am I going to do? I'm white, I can't do anything about it. But that's where I think we sometimes overdo it. We overdo it, and we kind of make them like enemies, or you are not listening to me. But in my opinion, if I were given a chance to refix the DEI, I would say that inclusion should not cause exclusion, but inclusion should be a way where we are including everybody, but at the same time, helping folks who are white to understand that they are in a sense of privilege. They need everybody has privilege, by the way. It's not that white people have privilege and black people don't, or brown don't. Everyone has privilege, but you need to tune up what privilege you want to use and what privilege, or how do you want to be an ally in the workspace. How can you learn from a person who's black, your colleague who is Asian, a colleague who is a Muslim, or your colleague who is gay? Building that allyship is what is so critical in the workplace, and sometimes leaders don't realize that the human value is what builds the company. Business value can change anytime based on that, because if you don't have the right people, you cannot run your organization.
That's right.
Unfortunately, I think there is a change. It doesn't happen in the letterhead of the company. It happens in the heart of the employees. So if you want to make a change, go and let your life be an example. That's when the leadership trust comes in. You can tell anything you want in the pride time. I remember an organization that called and said the CEO was addressing the Pride group during Pride season, and he said the wrong terms for everything. He didn't know what he was talking. He was just blabbering something. The trans community got really mad, and they brought it up to the CDO, and the chief diversity officer told the CEO that you need to educate yourself before you're talking to this community. And now that's what is missing, right? Most of the organization, the employees do not trust the leaders because the leaders are not truly an ally of the community.
That's right. That's right. And you raise a lot of good points, and one of those is, I think, in my opinion, we're creating more segregation than inclusion
Right.
in every aspect of society. So I love what you said there. So Celia, I want to get your thoughts. You talked about this and being a transgender yourself.
Mm.
What are your thoughts about transgenders in leadership roles, and how are you going to change this?
One of the things that I'm doing currently is that's a very good point. In fact, I'm working on it. So I'm working with two organizations. One is there are lots of LGBTQ voices today, and I've with my friend Martin from Australia is one of the persons who started the gay boxing championship across the world.
Mhm.
Martin Starr. Martin and I, we are the top LinkedIn voices, and what we thought we need to do is to elevate the voices of the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ leaders, entrepreneurs, LGBTQ investors. So we have created a program called Elevate Executives, where we have partnered with two of our friends who are really good in the marketing space, and they have been the leaders in the marketing space for more than 20 years, probably many decades. And Ben and Vince, they are really good friends, and they are cis people. They are not even nothing to do with LGBTQ, but we have created allyship with community, with people who are good in this space to elevate the voice of the trans community. It's called Elevating Executives. And it's a program where we walk them through a 12-step, I mean, it's a 6 months program where we talk about so many aspects of helping a ghostwrite an article, doing podcast, and also having parties for them to, where we have book signing parties and making sure that their voice is elevated, the stories are elevated. So that is one program that I'm working on. That's an international program actually, and we are trying to create partners, and we are looking at partners who can help us in that space. The second thing that I'm doing is I'm also part of the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce in LA. So this is the community. I live in Southern California. So what I did was I joined the Chamber of Commerce, and I've taken all the trans executives and also the trans entrepreneurs in our community. I want to elevate their voice and give them an opportunity to share about the platform, what they do, what business they are in. And I've started this program, and I'm going to start making sure that the trans entrepreneurs are being recognized. They are leaders in the community. Some of them are part of a large organization, but elevating the voice and making sure that they have the right platforms is one way to also recognize and also tell the companies, like suppose our trans folks in the Google office, they can tell them that we want to help you. If you have a program where you feel like you want to be a part of, then we can sponsor you for those programs. So we have also created that kind of a sponsorship act for the companies to sponsor their employees so they can elevate their voices, and they're all leaders in the community, ambassadors for the company, so they can truly bring change rather than just being very performative. Now they can truly say that we have implemented this, we have done this, we have done this, and make those changes and bring those ideas. So I have constantly been looking at how can we elevate leaders and also create leaders. So these are existing leaders I talked about, and creating leaders is something that I have started working and mentoring a lot of trans folks who are still not started business, but I've given them business ideas. And I've been part of so many organizations, and I'm part of the workforce board in our county. I'm the only trans person in that board, entire board today. And my voice matters because they feel like they're getting a different perspective. Not only I'm an immigrant, I'm an Asian, but I'm also an entrepreneur. And of course, I'm trans, and I always tell them this, being trans is not my goal in life. Let me tell you.
Yes. Yeah.
Listeners, you might think, what, Celia is crazy? No, actually, being trans is not my agenda in life. Being a good human being is my agenda in life. You
Hmm.
can be a trans person and still be a jerk. Oh, I have seen a lot of jerks. I mean, I'm not saying that every trans person is a jerk, but as a human being, you need to know how you can help another human being. How can you be an ally to another human being rather than just being a jerk in every way? So, yeah, elevating leaders, working with LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce. I've also found mentorship programs where companies can mentor an entrepreneur. And I'm also talking to USC, Marshall School of Business, to see if we can have some of the students actually mentor startup trans folks. So I'm trying to create some programs and trying to work with different leaders and academic institutions where they can really do something for the community. And yeah, I just had a call today with USC, and I'm so excited. And we're working on some ways in which we can open up some programs like this. Um, but yeah, end of the day, it's all about people. And if I can create more leaders, not just within the trans community, but I've always had the heart for people who are marginalized. I do branding workshops, I do free resume workshops, and
Nice.
I do review resumes of people from different intersectional identities, Black community, Latinos, help them with undocumentation, support. I have a lot of network in the community, therapists, and few other organizations where we can lead them to. I think the future that I see, Rob, it's more about building allyship, and that's the only way I think we can make sure that we are being helped and we are also helping someone.
Absolutely. And again, it's so important that, and I want to ask you this question, and I'm going to use an analogy,
Mhm.
right? I don't want to jump ahead. So I wanted to ask you, how do you feel when you get judged by people, Celia? And I know it happens to all of us.
I know, I know. I'll share my recent story, which is interesting. I went to Costco, and for the listener today and listeners today, it's interesting because I have not medically transitioned. I've socially transitioned because of medical conditions, and I cannot. I have other heart issues. Just want to set that stage before I get to the story. So when I go out in the community, when I'm go grocery shopping, wherever I go, where they ask me for my ID, when I pull out my ID, they always look at me as to, is this you? Or in Costco, they told me, is this your husband's ID? And I said, no, this is me. So I kind of laugh at one point, and sometimes I feel like, and this lady was staring at me, and she was like looking at the license, and I was so angry. I was like, are you judging me? I'm so angry right now. But then I thought to myself, she's just doing her job. She needs to do this, and I can't be that critical about people. Sometimes she's not intentional.
Hmm.
She's just doing her job. And I was smiling at her, and she kind of, she was like, oh, okay. And then she moved on. And when I was walking outside Costco, I thought, this is such a simple thing. She could have created a scene, called her boss, and said, I don't know this person is, but she just trusted me. And instead of understanding that way, I'm thinking that, she is judging me. So I think a lot of times in my life, when people, sometimes when they misunderstand you, and especially when I'm in an audio call, they hear my voice and they say, hello, sir, what can I do for you? I'll be like, okay, by the way, my name is Celia, and I go by she and they pronouns. And they'll be like, oh, thank you, sir. So what can I do for you? I'll be like, please call me ma'am, if that's okay. And they'll be, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you're trans, because they're always tuned to saying
Yes.
ma'am. And so I feel like many times it's always to explain to them, and so that they don't. But I found in my experience in 40, 50 years, that people, you can always educate people who are ignorant, but you cannot educate people who are arrogant.
That's right.
I have very seldom come across people who are arrogant, that they know you're a trans person and they call you sir. Um, And that's very, very small percentage I've come across. Like someone who knows that I'm trans, they hate me because I'm not just trans, but an Asian, an immigrant, and I'm taking away the jobs. And they're like, "Go back to your country." I've got a lot of that. I know our listener can also relate to it. But sometimes we carry these judgmental things, but at the same time, do we want to waste our time on certain judgment that actually is meant in a positive way, or probably they're doing your job? So I give grace. I have a grace approach where people have given me grace a lot of times. They have been nice to me because I'm trans, and some of them have gone out of the way to help me because I'm trans, and I want to do that. If they misgender me, I correct them with grace. I correct them with, I say that, hey, I know you didn't mean it, but my pronouns are she and they, and they're like, okay. Um, and then they're okay. And I said, don't apologize. Don't have to apologize, because sometimes they feel so bad about it, and they're like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it. But like, no, it's okay. It's like, if I have to spell your name, your last name, and I might butcher your last name.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to keep dwelling in it. I'm going to say, I'm so sorry. It's Kamranpur, right? Kamranpur.
Yes.
I might have butchered the name and then when you correct me, what's that? How it's spelled, Rob? Your last name?
Kamranpoor.
How do you spell?
Oh, how is it? Kamranpur.
Kamranpur.
Yeah.
So when you correct me, this is how I correct people with my gender, and you're not offended, right? You're not offended because you are wanting to teach, and that's exactly how trans people should also take it, and not assume that you should know this better.
That's right.
They may not. And that's exactly why I was kind of creating this little example here. And sometimes you don't know, and it's okay to ask and say, like, can I, how do I call you? And not assume, you can, not assume, but also ask, because I misgendered a person, and they told me, hey, I am not she, I am they. But I looked at them and they looked like she. And I have made a lot of mistakes myself, trust me. So they have given grace, and I think we need to give grace to people who are willing to learn and they're not intentional. That is very key in leadership qualities.
And this is why I wanted to tie a few things back to this question. This is why I asked you this question, and you kind of set me up perfectly. You talked about being a good person, all right? We talk about trans, being a good person, being judged. I want to use the analogy of, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the show Love is Blind, where there's a wall between people and they try to find love, not even seeing each other and how they look, right? And I want to use that analogy because, being somebody like yourself, Celia, that you have great leadership skills, you have, a great education background, great technical skills. You've done a lot of great work in the industry. And it's so sad that somebody judges you based on perception. That's all it is that how you look on the outside. Inside your mind, everything is the same. You still function the same. You think the same. You can still run the same corporations. Like you can run the same team. That's a sad part, in my opinion. And I think it's a huge loss to organizations and even people that, here you have a good person that really wants to make a difference in this world, in this society. And like you said, by being a good person, by creating leaders, and we're going to shit all over them because we think they don't look like us.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been in those situations, and I think most of the time it's bias. Sometimes it's unconscious bias, sometimes it's conscious bias. It's also that they're not familiar with the trans community, and they don't know how to react many times because we react in a very adverse way. A lot of times we are always taught to be defensive.
Yes.
So I think I'm trying to educate people, saying that if you're working in a corporate world, you're a transgender person, you need to know that that's a different world. They're not going to understand you. So there is going to be a lot of learning both sides. And I think when you humanize these issues, like I was telling you before, I don't want to be known as a trans person. Being trans person is not my agenda. The reason is, when I always introduce myself, I'll say, I'm Celia, I'm a trans person. My pronouns are she and they. And I was like, okay. And after a while, I was thinking, oh, really? That's actually not really my identity. It's part of my identity, but not my identity. I'm an Asian. I'm an immigrant. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a musician. I'm a songwriter. I love hiking. I have done so many things. My wife and I'm a parent of a 24-year-old beautiful daughter. I'm married to a cisgender woman. I have a great family life. I love watching cooking shows. I love British Bake Off. I had 8 cats in my house. Now, what I'm actually doing is I'm humanizing it slowly. I'm taking them away from the bias and kind of humanizing it, telling them that we have this. Interestingly, I'll tell you a story. Well, I was talking to one person who disagreed with me, and I was like, I don't know, this is your lifestyle choice, it's fine. And I said, no, this is my life. And he was like, no, I don't agree with you. And I was saying that exactly told him I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter, and he was like, "What? You're a musician? What did you do?" I said I was in the rock band in college. I used to play Dire Straits. In fact, "Walk of Life" is my favorite song. He was like, "Oh my God, we connected. We never disagreed on everything. We connected there, and that's what is human connection. It's more about." There are so many identities within you. Sometimes you find that identity and you connect with people.
Yes.
And I've been to police station. I've had tough conversations. There are a lot of trans people who cannot go to the police station. I've gone to the police station. I've sat with the police chief in our county, and I've said, what if I'm a trans person? What are the risks I'm facing? And he was explaining everything. You got to be a little more. And he learned a lot that day from me. As an Asian trans person, I was educating the police officer, and I was also educating myself. You can have a wall between you and another person, and sometimes you are going by the voice of that person. Sometimes you are assuming, like you talked about that show.
Yeah.
You're assuming some emotions. You're assuming what you hear, what you're listening to, and you're making all these perceptions in your mind. If you have never seen me, and when people listen to my podcast, they think this is a man. I don't know how Celia looks like. And I always tell them that don't make assumptions based on how people are. I'll tell you, when I first saw you, I thought you were an Indian. I made an assumption because I saw you and I thought, you look more like an Indian, Asian Indian, and I thought maybe you are an Asian Indian. But I made a wrong assumption. So people make wrong assumptions based on how they look, how they talk, but when they get to know the person a little bit more, it changes the perception of, and that's what I think is missing in the workplace. It's like, don't bring your personal stuff to me, bring your professional stuff. Don't bring your personal life into the workplace. Just keep it outside, come do the job and go. I've heard a lot of people say that, but then they say, but why do you look different? Why do you sound different? Because you've not known me. You only know one part of my identity. Why don't you get to know me? And that's exactly what changes people. And I tell them, why don't we grab coffee? You have never seen me. Let's go grab coffee. You're like, oh, I don't want to grab coffee with you. I'm like, hey, you want to drink coffee? You want to drink coffee? Let's go. We sit and talk, and then amazing connection. I've done that so much. So many people who disagreed with me, and they have only seen behind the wall that person. All they know is a trans person. They're like drag queens. They're like, ooh, they're messing up our children. They're taking away our bathrooms or sports. I'm a human being. They don't humanize it. They demonize it. They politicize it. And that's the problem we have today. We're all, everyone is different. I can hear the voice of another person behind the wall, and I can assume that white old men are always the bad people. Actually, no. I learned from a white old man who told me that, Celia, no matter what I say, people always think I'm a white old man. I have privilege. Actually, I'm not. And that's when I felt like, okay, I know you don't have the experience of what I'm going through, but at least let me listen to you. So it's not always about me. And I said, I want to know you. Tell me about you. He was surprised. He said, Celia, your story is amazing. I said, okay, enough about me. Tell me about you. And I heard his story, and I was just in tears because he was sharing a lot of things. He's a white old man. That is where I think the bias stands.
Yes.
Break these biases, break these walls. See beyond this, and get to know the person. Even in the workplace, you may not get to know the person, but try to make an attempt. When you get to know the person, that's what builds that long-lasting sense of belonging in the workplace. Including is not just calling a person to the party and saying that, what, come to our home, and we, keep the glass there, don't go there. There is a bathroom downstairs for you. The rest of the guests can go there because, I want to make sure you're okay. And that's not inclusion. That's not inclusion at all. That's inclusion which is causing exclusion. The inclusion is actually integrating it, integrating your identities into your data of that person, and then reading the whole person in a holistic way and saying, I may disagree with this, but I don't want to disrespect you. I may disagree with you on politically, but I still respect you as a human being because I love the same music you love. I love the same food that you love. I just want to sit and talk, but let's not disagree on. We may disagree on so many things, but let's not disagree on everything just because we disagree on one thing.
That's right. That's right. No, that's awesome, and I'm glad that you shared this. You mentioned a lot of great points, and we've come to almost the end of the show. But before we wrap up, this is my rapid fire questions part of the show that I go through. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to give me what comes to the top of your mind first. So let's start with the first one. What is your advice to organizations who promote DEI but don't live the values?
Allyship. So allies is allyship. I know it's a random question, so it's basically allyship.
How do we help those who are suffering in silence?
Listen to them. Yeah, things.
What does the following mean to you? Empower me to empower you.
Standing the beach and holding each other's hand, because the waves are coming and hitting you, and you want to hold on to each other. Empowering. I'm going to empower you, and I want you to empower me when the waves bashes. Something like that.
Amazing. Amazing. Standing beside each other. Great. And Celia, where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I am also on Facebook and Instagram, and I have my own company. I'm the CEO and founder of Rubicon Consulting. I do a lot of work with inclusive clinical trials. I've taken the inclusivity from the workplace to the external part of it, which is in the clinical trials and other spaces where there's so much going on. And just keep connecting with me on LinkedIn. For close to 20,000 followers, but at the same time, I would love to always talk about not perfection, but talk about humanizing issues that are really important to us. I want to hear your voice as much as you're hearing my voice today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. For all those that are listening, if you've got any questions for Celia, put your comments and questions below, and I'll make sure they get to her, or if you want to reach her directly. Again, I want to take this time to thank you so much for being with me today. I greatly appreciate it. I love your stories. I love what you shared with people. I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people. It's going to help a lot of people to bring out that courage and hope that they're missing in their lives. And I'm hoping that some people listen to this and hear what leadership is really about. So again, thank you very much, Celia. And we'll see all of you guys on the next podcast. Have a great one, everyone.